Jason Murphy, a former sales engineer here at Enable. I left for about 4 years to go work for a top 20 MSP, one of those top 20 CRN rated MSPs, where I helped them kick off their ServiceNow division, worked on their managed services side. I was a systems architect, and I had about 3 or 4 other titles in those 4 years. So I did a little bit of everything while I was there. And then I left and I went to go work for a small boutique MSP centered around things like healthcare and nonprofits, and working with their sales and technical teams. But all in all, I've been focused on things like automation, IT service management, and obviously N-Central for the better part of about 10 years now. What we're going to do today, obviously the premise around this bootcamp is customer onboarding in N-Central. So we're going to talk about a quick introduction, the whys of customer onboarding a new client. We're going to talk about physical server and hardware monitoring, network monitoring, iDrac and ILO monitoring, VMware monitoring, a lot of monitoring, obviously, because that is the visibility into your customers' networks, all remote. And then we're going to talk about preparing for other devices and deployment in N-Central. Now, I do things a little bit differently in N-Central, and the reason being, and I told you I work for an MSP, a really, really big MSP here in Canada, because when I was a sales engineer, I used to do pre-sales demos for new partners, but I also used to do post-sales. I used to look after our major accounts team. So if you were 5,000 devices and higher, you may have spoken to me previously. And I thought I knew how to work in Central and run it and deploy and everything else, but it wasn't until I started using it in the field that I really got a good sense of all the intricacies that go along with customer onboarding, because it's not just in Central you need to worry about. There are a lot of other moving parts, software deployments, installing other software, tons of other things that are going on. So I want to make sure that you have a solid foundation around the N-Central piece. Now, obviously, I'm one of the nerds, and I'm one of the people responsible for the automation cookbook. We have over 525 policies available today. Head on over to success.n-able.com/cookbook. Obviously, put that in your bookmarks, because that's where all of our custom monitoring and automation reside. As well, you want to understand what's going on with the uptime of some of our other products, you can head over to status.n-able.com. Or if you want to listen to a particular boot camp that I may have done previously, or if you're looking to listen to particular office hours that we have every month, head on over to success.n-able.com and click on the MSP Institute. And we're doing a little plug for Market Builder. This is something that my content team slipped into my slide here. If you're interested in marketing, by all means, head on over to success.n-able.com. And we have a free tool for our partners called Market Builder, and you can build collateral material and make it look all awesome for your sales team. Okay. Now, let's get to it. What is the importance of a proper onboarding in N-Central? And as somebody who is onboarded, I've helped partners onboard as well. So I would say probably thousands of customers at this point, because the MSP I worked for had over 1,100. So not all of those customers were in N-Central, but a good majority were. So I've done a lot of onboarding. I've done a lot of scripted onboarding. I've done a lot of probe-based onboarding. But I know I've also missed things in customer environments. So if you have gaps in your monitoring, it can cost you big, especially out of the gates. When you are onboarding that customer and you miss something, you could have a little bit of egg on your face. So we don't want to miss anything. And if you're doing the necessary prep accordingly, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you shouldn't miss anything at all. A bad deployment or a missed device can make you look incompetent. N-Central policies need to be pre-configured to your managed services offering, and we can do that. And we'll talk about that as we go through things like rules and service templates. Ensure you're operating your N-Central deployment and onboarding. I forget what that even means right now off the top of my head, but it's one of those things where I also do an optimization boot camp around how to run N-Central as an administrator. N-central is great at Windows devices, but it can do much more. And I see this all the time. Some people aren't even aware that you can do network devices in N-central or NASes or SANs or a lot of other hardware that N-central is really, really great at. Bad onboarding with a new customer can often set the tone for the relationship, and I can personally attest to this. I onboarded a customer once when I was first starting out with N-central for this MSP because they had another RMM, which I displaced, but it was one of those things where out of the gates, I missed a few things, and I would tell you, it started things off rocky, right? And you don't really want to do that. So you want to make sure that, and this is before we had a documentation tool and everything else. So it was one of those things that I created a statement of procedure around and made sure that our onboarding process was nice and tight. If you know how to onboard, is the team responsible for onboarding in the now? And what I mean by that is that you might be the N-central administrator, but are you also responsible for onboarding the customer? When you're a major account, and those are the people who are 5,000 plus, typically, from what I see, it's a whole other team. And you might be operating in N-central, but that other team may not know as much as you do when it comes to pulling in devices the way you need them to. So, and when I worked for that big MSP, it was our field services team, and they were going around with USB drives, sticking them in the USB ports for laptops and workstations and interrupting end users when I was like, okay, hold up here. There's got to be a better way. So that's why I really wanted to build this boot camp, because after everything was said and done, I realized that there were certain things I had to do every time, and that's why I built this boot camp. So again, good onboarding gives your customer the confidence in you, okay? So what happens if you have everything deployed? You're not a new partner, you've been around 5+ years. Well, ensure that you have automations and policies configured, right? So do a review. Make sure that, if you have deployment rules, or if you have, self-healing or automations deployed, that they're working for you. Do a review. Take bite-sized chunks and ensure that your customer is going to be fully and correctly onboarded. At the end of this boot camp, I've had people message me afterwards and say, well, I already have 300 customers. Do I have to re-onboard them? No, of course you don't. But you do want to take some bite-sized chunks and maybe firm up what might be missing in terms of those gaps. And let's talk about home users, because that is a huge one. Obviously the plague brought in a huge amount of home users because everybody's displaced from working from home, and that caused a lot of disruption, especially around managing your devices. And I've seen this so many times with our customers, because I meet with partners all the time and talk to them about how to optimize their N-central, and they have devices aren't checking in for like 6 months to a year, those kinds of things. So what I always tell people is look to your agreement and your contract and make sure those amounts add up. Whether you have user-based billing or device-based billing practices, you should be looking to true up your accounts in N-central. Now, we used to do that with our VCIO and our account manager every quarter, right? So the quarterly business review was always around a true up from our side of the business as well. How many devices? How many users? Let's put it all together and make sure that they align to the contract. What do you do if you've been with us for years? Well, there's always room for improvement, right? Especially in customer onboarding. So there's 3 things I recommend. 1, optimization. Come to my boot camp. I'll be offering it, I think it's next month. Continuous improvement. Always, perform periodic spot checks on your customers, especially your biggest ones. You're the ones that are paying you the most money, right? You have your own elite or super elite customers, and you need to obviously, treat them accordingly as well. Now, documentation and SOPs, that's where I really hit the ground running when I was able to document my onboarding process and all of the other, pieces that all kind of align. I'll give you a prime example. When I worked for that MSP, none of our SOPs had anything to do with N-central, or at least the former RMM that we used to use. What happened was the professional services team was going in, doing firewall upgrades, displacing servers, putting in SANs, doing a whole bunch of great professional services work. but there was no tie-in back to N-central. So, I was like, okay, well, who's going to do that work? Like if they're doing a digital transformation project or they're doing projects in the customer, well, am I supposed to set up magic policies to update that? That's where you need to be in the now around who is doing what with these customer environments, because you can have N-central pick up things automatically. Okay, so the state of your system, hopefully it doesn't look like that cable management mess in front of you, and I'm sure it doesn't. But you've been using N-central either a little bit or a while, and that is fine. The good news here is this particular boot camp is going to be a good refresher if you've been using N-central for 5+ years. But if you're brand new to it, it's going to kind of maybe shore up some things that you didn't know. Okay. Now I will tell you, there was a person on my boot camp this morning who said I spent way too much time on SNMP. I think I spent about maybe 10 minutes. But SNMP is something that I'm very passionate about. It's one of those things that I know N-central is really good at, especially around if you know how to walk a MIB and insert an OID into N-central and really walk and do some custom monitoring. There's a lot of power to what can be done with custom monitoring in N-central. So I spent a little bit of time on that. And he thought it was a bit of a waste, and that's fine. I'm not here to please everybody. I just want to make sure that maybe this is either a good refresher for you, or hey, maybe you're going to learn something along the way. Okay, so first things first, we're going to create a customer and a site in N-central. Now, I'm probably not going to create a site because I'm sure you get that, but creating a customer in N-central is the first step, right? The reason why it's the first step is because there can be, especially if you're scripting out an agent deployment or a probe deployment, you need the customer to be created first. All right, so I always like to start with the customer creation in N-central first. At the SO level, in the pink purple area, under actions, add customer, you give it a name, and then from there, you give it the license type. And for the most part, we're always going to choose professional. And you can also map to your corresponding PSA, whether it's AutoTask, ConnectWise, etc. And then you're going to give it some credentials. Typically in an on-premise situation, you're going to give it a domain / a username. And we're going to talk about a little bit of best practices around that. And then you're going to click Save. Customer is now created. Okay. Now, what I typically like to do is I like to set up a service account for N-central that no one really meddles with other than the probe and N-central, and something like an MSP admin -svc at customerdomain.com. Right now, it's important to note that not every customer is going to have a domain. I've onboarded plenty of customers on work groups. Is there several things you can do to speed things up? Yeah, maybe. One of them is not to turn on COM and make it look like a domain. It's just, that's more of a waste of time, I find. Most of the time, your customers are going to either be in Azure or they're going to have a domain environment most of the time, right? But the other part is you're going to have home users as well. And how do you get them onboarded? So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through as well, right? Now, there is a best practice tip, and that is that little -svc, right? And that's a Microsoft best practice. When you're naming your service accounts, you should be identifying those service accounts with that -svc in them, just so that people know that it's a service account and they're not going to change it or reset it or what have you, because that can often break things. Jesse asked, will this recording be available after this webinar? Unfortunately, no, it won't. Not this particular one. There's certain subsets that I have posted. I'm not posting this one, only because this is something that's going to go through a continuous improvement. So I may post it next year, sometime in 2022, but this particular one, I'm not going to, because there are a few missing pieces within this boot camp that I'm going to pull in a little bit later on. Believe it or not, creating boot camps is it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. And the unfortunate part is I don't have a couple of the devices that I wanted to get into today. I've got an HP Pro Curve, I've got some VMware, which is great. It's going to be a good baseline, but there's some additional stuff like a Palo Alto and some other things that I wanted to go through with you that I'm actually going to do another iteration on for Q1. So stay tuned for that. Jordan asks, success.n-able.com/cookbook doesn't seem to be working. Oh, it's cookbooks with an S at the end. Okay, and I often do. I have a bookmark, so I never think about it, but there's it's plural with cookbooks, by the way. Chris Simon, why do you provide the credentials at the customer level instead of only where you need it? This will prevent unnecessary password leaking willingly or unwillingly. And I get that, right? Like everybody is very conscious of security. Nobody wants to provide N-central with cache credentials or what have you. However, I do. But if that is concern for you, Chris, by all means, don't. I'm not sure how you're going to use a probe in those situations, or maybe you don't, and it doesn't apply to you. But it's one of those things where N-central is a hardened appliance. I can do the whole security spiel if you want me to, but there is no credential leaking. You would have to breach into the Linux kernel to be able to do that. And hopefully you have followed my best practice around N-central hardening. And if you haven't, head on over to success.n-able.com/blogs, and you'll see one for the N-central hardening, which basically means close port 10,022 specifically. Now that being said, Zachary asks a question. I'm taking screenshots of the slides. That's perfect. Unfortunately, and I get this question all the time, can you send me the slides? I'm not allowed to. Our content team will not allow me to send slides. I don't know why, but it's a legal thing. So if you want to take screenshots, you're more than welcome to do so. Absolutely. Okay, Jordan. We manually install the probe and provide the credentials during the installation. Yeah, you can do that too. I mean, I like to have the two tied together. There's various things that rely on those credentials. If you do file transfers through N-central, third-party push, there's a couple other things that rely on those credentials. But if you don't use that kind of stuff, then don't do it. That's fine. Okay, so let's go here. And the next thing up, we're going to hop into N-central right now and talk about it. All right, so this is my little lab environment. Again, I'm missing some things. They're coming in, by the week, but this is where I'm at today. So first things first, I'm going to hop on a domain controller. I did call it DC something, so here we go. Oh, of course. Well, the good news is I can use RDP. Oh, am I still on VPN? One sec. I am. Good news is I do have another domain controller in here, but name is Radar. Here we go. There we go. Finally. Okay, so let's go to users and computers. Okay. Under users, we're going to find the domain admin. I'm just going to copy administrator here, just for the sake of time. So if I copy that, again, what I'll do is I give it a admin account and central, and then again, MSP admin -SBC, and click next, give it a password, change user, whatever, next. You get it, right? So we're going to create that particular account. Now, it's going to have the permissions we need to be able to do what we need to on the domain. And again, like Chris said, if you're really worried about, password leakage or what have you from the N-central database, yeah, I mean, you can bypass that part for sure. Okay. Now, as we continue, let me just come back to my slides. What we also want to do is prepare the domain for N-central as well. Okay, so for every single customer, we're going to log into the customer domain, open the snap-in for Active Directory users and computers. We're going to right-click and copy the domain admin account like we just did. Ensure the new service account is a member of the domain security group, and then we can sign out of the Windows domain controller. Then what we're going to do is now open a GPO right? So we're going to open Group Policy Management Editor. We can right-click and edit the domain.local or customer domain.local or whatever it's going to be called. And then we're going to link and create a GPO in this domain. From there, what we're going to do is right-click and edit that particular GPO and navigate to computer configuration, policies, administrative templates, network connections, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to turn on these three things. So instead of talking about it, let's just do it. All right, so let me come down here to demo. There it is, group policy management. And we're going to, if you've never been into, I mean, everyone's a pro here, I'm sure, but if you've never been in group policy before, you're going to navigate down to just below where it says domains. You may have multiple, you may have a forest of domains. That's very unlikely. But if you do, you want to focus on the production network where your customers are residing. You're going to create and link a GPO. So we're going to call this enable 2. Click OK. And then we're going to right click, edit. And there's 3 group policies you want to do for every single on-premise domain in every single customer. Now, this is something I see a lot of our partners who I work with miss. They just don't do it. And you don't necessarily have to, but if you want to use any of the automation, you want us to pick up devices automatically, then you're definitely going to want to, okay? And I do it anyways. I mean, it doesn't harm to standardize your offering or your onboarding. So from here, what I do is I enable ICMP. We're going to be able to ping everything in the environment, apply and OK. Then what we're going to do is we're going to allow inbound file and print sharing exception enabled. I put a star. You can limit it to whatever you want, such as IP addresses or particular subnets. I just do everything. Click OK. And then what we're going to do is allow an inbound remote administration exception. So we can also do things like standardize on RDP. Again, you can limit this to particular IP addresses, so say other servers, or you can open it up to the entire subnet. Okay, those are the 3 things that I do. Then I also come into DNS. Now, if you also run a Windows DHCP, not as common these days. I mean, it still happens. Geez, I was talking to a customer the other day. They said they had 3 or 4 SBS servers that they were looking after. So you never know what you're going to get, right? But it's one of those things where if you come in here, right click, you're going to set aging and scavenging for all zones. Now, how do you configure this? Simply check the box and then put 2 times. I usually go by 2 times. You can put 3 times, but it's usually 2 to 3 times the HTTP lease rate. So again, if it's, your lease is 24 hours, you can put 2 to 3 days, right? In my environment, it's like 2 hours or 2 days, I should say. And then I've just upped it to 7, right? That's it. Click OK. And you've now scavenged all those stale records that are sitting out there. You're now good to go. That's it. Now, when you're inheriting a customer domain, you're never going to always get what you expect, especially if you have onboarded a new customer that has now come from another MSP. You don't know what their security is like. You don't know what they've turned on. You're coming in blind, right? So it's always good to make sure that you have everything documented, that you have your standard onboarding procedures kind of laid out methodically to check through kind of everything. And a part of mine has always been about turning on those 3 group policy objects, and then also doing the DNS. Okay, so, and again, I skipped over this particular slide, but here it is if you need to take a screenshot of it. This is another thing that you want to do. I didn't do the DHCP only because I don't have a Windows DHCP. It's all controlled by the firewall. But again, lease rate was 2 days, so I just upped it to 7. Okay. Now, another demo. Now, we're going to do some cool stuff. Physical servers and hardware monitoring. Now, just by, we're not going to do a poll or anything, but just using the questions pane how many of you are a Hyper-V shop, right, versus VMware? Just put Hyper-V or VMware, one or the two, or you can say both. There's a lot of VMware in here. That's awesome. I'm VMware certified, by the way, so I'm a little biased. But this particular step that I'm going through is going to be great for anyone who is Hyper-V shop. Now, there's basically 3 of you because Chris said both. So, and yeah, when you're onboarding a customer, you might have Hyper-V, you might have VMware, you got a little combination. When I worked for an MSP, we had roughly around 200 hosts all in VMware. So it was one of those things that I had to kind of focus on that myself. Okay, so we're just going to come in here and talk a little bit about pro-based monitoring. Okay, and the reason being is, and this is again something I'm going to spend about 10 minutes on. And if you know SNMP inside and out, I don't know, grab a cup of coffee or what have you, but not everyone is aware that we can monitor things like firewalls, routers, switches, NASA SANs, UPSs. Now I'm a little biased because I looked after APC and PowerWare. There are other ones I'm sure that are out there that we can do as well. ILOs, iDracs, physical servers, and other custom devices. In fact, I was working with a partner of ours that I've known for a long, long time on Silver Peak monitoring, which is an SD-WAN appliance. Yeah, it's got full SNMP, so we were building some queries on that kind of stuff. Jesse asked, when you worked for that bigger company in Canada, did they have a clean dashboard? I find with so many physical hosts, it's difficult to keep things clean and pristine. I'm interested to hear your comment back. Well, Jesse, I'd be lying if I said I had everything lit up in a green. That just is not the MSP, especially based on how lean we were running our NOC. In fact, when I came to that particular MSP, they didn't even have a NOC. They weren't even acting proactive. And the reason being is they thought, proactive support was really a reactive alignment of their resources. You can talk proactive, but are you being proactive? Do you have a NOC team? Do you have somebody looking at your dashboards? Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, which is really unrelated to customer onboarding, but I'm actually doing a webinar on NOC services on Thursday with a partner of ours called InBay, and they do outsourced NOC services for MSPs who are struggling with the weekend 24/7 thing. So obviously feel free to head over to success.n-able.com, click on events, and you'll see it listed there. But I set up NOCs. I've struggled with it. It took me months to get my management team to understand how proactive support actually can be a major differentiator. So come on over and check that out. Okay, so when it comes to physical servers, right? Again, this is important for the Hyper-V stuff, right? We'll get to the iDrac and ILOs and the VMware stuff in just a little bit. We're going to go through that. Don't worry, but let me talk about this because it's one of those things where you inherit a customer who maybe just has a physical Windows domain controller. That is it, right? There's no Hyper-V, there's no VMware, right? The good news is you can still, on any Windows server, monitor the hardware, providing that it is an HP or Dell. Lenovo is a little bit tricky. Apparently, they exposed some of their SNMP stuff now. Historically, they never did. They didn't have an SNMP agent back in the day. So what we're going to do, and very simply, is we're going to ensure the management software is installed, because that is the WMI provider that we're going to query, right? So Dell EMC Open Managed, or Dell OMSA, I think it's called, or the HPE Systems Management homepage, which used to be the HP Insight Manager. Okay, so everyone's changing their names. So when you come in here, right, we want to ensure that SNMP is turned on. Now, you can see the steps below you. Okay, if you want, you can take a screenshot of this, but we're going to actually go ahead and do that. Now, I want to leave it right here because we're going to talk about troubleshooting tips afterwards. And this is something that it's funny that Jesse's on the call today, because I'll pick on Jesse because you know, he was having some struggles around SNMP and quality monitoring. It was working some places, but not working on others. I see this stuff all of the time. And it's one of those things that we put our heads together and we got some things working. So let me just hop into here. Now, where is my server manager? Usually my server manager always starts, except when I'm on a boot camp, but here it is. First thing we're going to do is we're going to click on add roles and features. Now, sorry, it's just starting up here. Let's try it again. Nope, populating, here we go. There we are. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, basically in the instructions, all it is next, next, next. Oh, I have to click a device. Let's go with this one. Next. Okay, and then we're going to come down and look for SNMP. Where are you here? There it is. Okay, so it's already turned on, so I don't really have to. But just a note, if you are turning this on a Dell or an HP server, you do want to make sure that SNMP WMI provider is installed or turned on. Okay, when you do that, click next, click install. 2 minutes later, the service is now running in vanilla mode in the OS. Then what you're going to do is come into services, and then you're going to come down to SNMP, and SNMP traps is turned on natively in Windows, unless somebody in group policy has disabled it. But if you have SNMP traps, you need to turn on the SNMP agent to the service. And then what you're going to do is under security, you're going to configure your, you know, MSP Unity string, whatever it might be, right? And then from there, click OK, and you're done. I leave mine as public, nice and easy. Now, if you want additional security, you can also accept SNMP packets from these hosts, and this is where you would specify the IP address of the probe installed in that customer environment. That is it. Now, I just do this because this is my lab. It's in the DMZ. Nobody's getting to it except for me. But it's one of those things where apply and OK. One thing to note that I do find in terms of troubleshooting, if you just turn it on, you may not see a security tab right away, right? Just close down, launch services again, and then find SNMP, launch it, and the second time, it always shows up. But I don't know what it is when you first turn on SNMP, that security tab isn't always there. So just, you know, be mindful of that. Just relaunch it, try it again. Okay. Now, in N-Central, when you're discovering a device, I'm not just talking about the first time, but sometimes somebody, you know, buys a brand new NAS, right? And then you've got the IP address, you know, it's all networked, you know, 192.168.0.10, right? And then what you're going to be able to do is add in that IP and discover it via the probe, okay? What you should see every single time you do an SNMP discovery, providing that we can handshake, is we can see the OS version. It should be some kind of Linux, probably backend. Even if it's a NAS, it's all, you know, behind the scenes, but it's running some kind of Linux kernel. But in here, right, you're going to see some firmware information, right? As well, when you click on Add Task, Update Asset Info should also be there. That will then query the probe to say, hey, query me again. As well, if you click on Add, you can add in the default SNMP service. I forget the OID it's actually looking through, 1.3.5 something. But that's just to see if SNMP is running. If you get a green check mark here, have this, and can query this, by all means, SNMP should work, right? You should be able to apply monitoring directly to the device. So let's look at that, okay? Actually, this is a VM, so I'm going to get out of that. Let me go to Ivy, which is Eric's domain. And then from here, again, add task, update asset info. That's how I know SNMP is now good to go in handshaking. I can now ensure under settings, monitoring options, SNMP is now configured under the device, SNMP settings, V1, public. Again, additional security, you can do SNMP v3 and throw in your authorization, encryption. It's all right here, right? So that's all you need. And then I also add in the SNMP service just to make sure it's working, right? This is just the troubleshooting part. Like what happens if you've got the device in there, you can see all the Windows information, but you can't see any hardware, right? This is what Jesse and I had to work on the other day. Click one, add it in, and you will see SNMP if we go scroll down here. It'll add that in here in a moment. And again, it will be green, otherwise I wouldn't have any of the other stuff. Now let's talk about the other stuff. Once you've got SNMP working, the device is handshaking, you can come in, add in that Dell servers or the HP server template. And then what should happen is that it should add in things like fan statuses, logical drive, memory, physical drive, temperature, RAID statuses, right? And that's really important. You got a degraded RAID, you're going to know about it, right? Right on this is a Hyper-V host, so we'll just talk about it from a Hyper-V perspective, but there's a lot of customers that only have one single server running one function. It might not necessarily be Hyper-V, it might just be a Windows server. So in either one of those situations, you can ensure that you now have deep hardware visibility as well. Okay, a couple questions. Or a question from Chris. When you import an unknown device, only shows IP because of a faulty community string, and you set the community string correct afterwards, why can't I run the asset scan at that point, but I have to rediscover the device again to be able to fill in the missing info? I've blundered the community string a million times, only because, you know, where I used to work, I mandated everybody use a 20-character community string that was basically a password generator, you know, and I'd fat finger it all the time. I've never experienced that myself. You can still do SNMP troubleshooting, you know, the way I just described, right? When you come in here and you go into settings, as long as you've got this piece set up correctly, and also the piece set up on the server correctly, when you run that, you know, basically you're telling N-Central, hey, probe, requery me, you know, with the right information, that should just work. Now, I've had it, you know, I'm not going to blow smoke either. I've had it where I couldn't get it to work. I've actually deleted the device from N-Central and done the whole thing all over, and it worked perfectly. So I've never kind of experienced that myself recently, but I know stuff like that can happen. There's a lot coming on scanning of asset info in N-Central in the near future, along with some stuff like maintenance windows or unscheduled downtime and some other stuff you're going to see in a future build. But it's going to improve around that. No, it's not just you, Chris. There are just, you know, it's software, man. You set it up to query and you go, oh man, I fudged the spelling of public. I did a capital P instead of a lowercase p or whatever. Let's do it right the second time. You still can't get it to work. Yeah, man, I just start over and redo it. So it happens. Let's come in here again. Memory slots, you can see those. Gas is particular to Windows, obviously, and then fans, right? So lots of great hardware monitoring just on Windows itself. Now, let's see where we're at for time. We're actually making great time. Cool. Okay, prepare the customer environment for network monitoring. Now, this is going to be interesting because when I tried to do this morning, it didn't work. And I asked my colleague who owns the HP ProCurve to fix it for me. He said he did. So we're going to make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. And I wanted to pick on a ProCurve because I find a lot of techs are intimidated by command line. I'm sure that's not you, right? But if you're a junior not guy, or if you're the new in-central administrator, it's not like GUI based discovery or what have you, right? So just knowing what you can do in terms of just launching into PuTTY and running a few basic commands just to turn on SNMP. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, let's come back and let me pull up in Central. And this time I'm going to launch into Take Control. So on my other screen, here we go. I think that's it. Okay, so all I'm going to do is launch into PuTTY. Nothing overly complex. I just need the IP address of the, let's move that out of the way. We're just going to, I got stuff popping up all over the place here. Settle down, Firefox. All right, 192.168.0.10 and open. Okay. I think I fat fingered that. Hold on. Let me try it one more time. I couldn't remember if it was admin or administrator. Okay, so same issue as before. And again, it wouldn't be a boot camp without some kind of technical glitch. It is what it is, and that happens. But for the most part, what you're going to do is simply do what I was about to do and simply run some basic commands to enable SNMP. And if I can just come back here one sec to the HP ProCurve. Actually, let me just go into my slides, a little bit easier. Okay, it's very simple. And again, a simple Google foo of how to enable SNMP on an HP ProCurve is really this command, right? Now, I did fudge community on purpose because I didn't actually want to set it, but all you're going to do is launch into config and then type in SNMP-server space enable, E-N-A-B-L-E. And then next you're going to say, hey, SNMP server that I'm enabling, I want to, specify the community. And that would be community. And again, I use public on my stuff because it's just nice and easy. Now it's telling me community and isn't not put in properly. And then you're going to write to memory. And those were all the steps included from HP themselves. Now, I have heard there's other commands that you can use, especially around something like SNMP v3. Absolutely, right? I'm not the authority. You can take a screenshot and get a good idea here. But by all means, head over to the documentation of the vendor, whether it's Fortinet or whether it's SonicWall, Meraki, whoever, right? When it came to switching, I was always mostly familiar with HP Aruba, Cisco, what else? sometimes we would buy Meraki switches for our customers, but not too often. They were obviously, if you're a Meraki partner, they're really, really expensive. So it's one of those things where we just stuck in HP most of the time. So that's how you run that. So we're going to continue on, because if you're in VMware, which is the majority of the people who answered my question earlier, there was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of you are VMware centric MSPs. We're going to talk about that, but before we do, I think Jake has a question. What is your recommendation for monitoring the probe device's hardware itself? I have another probe in the same environment. In fact, in larger customer environments, you should have 2 probes. Especially, and this is why I'm talking about SNMP a lot, is because if you're using things like SNMP v3 and you have a very large customer deployment, I would say anything over 10 network devices, like 10 switches, firewalls, that probe is going to be taxed. So you want to split the load, absolutely. So, and again, not so much, you're not doing a whole lot of probe-based monitoring on customer endpoints like laptops and workstations, but if you have heavy network infrastructure and you're setting up SNMP v3, sometimes you might need 3 probes, depends on how much you're using, right? But can you monitor the probe hardware itself? Yeah, you can. I'm not going to kind of show you. I would say that's more advanced stuff, Jake. If you want to shoot me an email, I can probably write down the steps in probably 5 or 6 paragraphs. But what you're going to do is you're going to install probe into two servers, and then you're going to point the probe monitoring to the adjacent probe or the opposite probe that you want it from. So you have a little bit of redundancy in that. I hope that makes sense. But anyways, if you want, I can kind of outline it in probably 5 or 6 lines. Jason, I tried to set up SNMP monitoring on a Dell managed switch, and it ended up taking the network down since the probe was checking each port over and over again. I have been nervous about switch monitoring since then. What is your recommendation? That is funny, Jesse, because I'd like to think I've set up a lot of network monitoring. I would say that is a very isolated incident. I've never seen the probe. Actually, that's not true. I can misconfigure a probe to do a discovery on a customer in Bahamas, and we'll call it a financial institution. And I'm doing air quotes, you can't see it, but massive network. And when I did the discovery, I set up basically, this is why I argue against subnet discoveries, like doing small subsets. Because if you start doing /20s, that probe is just going to be doing discovery constantly. So you should not see that. That might have been isolated to a particular probe version or what have you, but I've never done that with just an SNMP discovery. Never, right? In fact, what should happen is that if it does, it will go through and try to identify all of the ports on the switch. But it should then go, oh, hey, I handshake, I'm done, right? So, making sure that you have the right, community string and what have you is probably a safe way to ensure that doesn't happen. Chris Simon, quick side question. We have a customer with over 1,500 SNMP okay. So let me just read it because I'm about to stop and talk to that piece. But quick side question. We have a customer with over 1,500 SNMP V2C devices. We monitor a lot with a single probe, but we notice it stops monitoring. Is there a hard limit on the max and advised? I think you're saying advised limit. There is. Is there a formula for it? No, but based on my experience, I mean, I've been working with customers and partners, I should say, for off and on for 10 years. And obviously doing this myself, and I had customers with thousands of, I had one customer with over 1,000 devices and heavy into networking because they were a franchise across, Canada and US, a particular hotel chain, and doing all of their network monitoring. It was a lot of fun, but a heck of a lot of work as well. It went fairly smoothly, but I did have a few probes that struggled, right? Now, the thing is if you have any more than 100 network devices, SNMP v2 is actually really, really light, right? I'll tell you right now, Chris, if you had 1,500 SNMP v3, you'd be talking probably 20 probes. That is a lot of querying. It's a heavy, heavy load. So it's, yeah, if you're in the process of splitting it up now, I would as well. And there's nothing wrong with, like, dedicating, hey, half the probes, half the services go from one probe, half of them go to the other. You can kind of carve it up any which way you want. But the probe, when it comes to SNMP 1 or 2, is super lightweight, super lightweight. And I would say getting into, if you can do 1,500, that is actually a pretty solid benchmark, right? So maybe 1,300 to 1,500 network devices for one single probe is probably as far as you're going to get. But when I had that hotel chain, we had servers in the US and servers in Canada, and I kind of split the load methodically or manually. So I always kind of did it that way. Okay. Now, again, we're going to hop into an iDrac and do this ourselves, but this is just an iDrac 7 because that's all I have in my lab. Again, a lot of the stuff is our old corporate equipment that I've now thrown into a lab. So what we're going to do is simply come into network under iDrac settings, network, go back, iDrac settings, and then network, services, SNMP agent, scroll down, and of course I'm scrolling. Scroll down, and what you're going to do is you're going to find where you can set up SNMP. So let's just do it and review it. Okay, so yeah, this is ID. Okay, so let's come into, I have to get the probe IP here. Bear with me for 1 sec, or the iDrac IP. Okay, 120, nice. Okay, root. Oh. And hopefully I didn't fat finger that. Hurry up and wait. See, this morning it was lightning fast, but not today. I'm never really patient enough for it to. Okay, finally got upload screen. At least we get a spinning wheel this time. Here we go. Now, while this loads and does this thing, let's just talk about why I'm even showing this. You guys know how to Google. You know how to pick up on configuring SNMP. The important part here is you also need to document it. Now, if you haven't looked in the GoToWebinar, I have a manual that I wrote. It's under handouts, so feel free to download that. It's basically a 30+ pager on how to onboard in N-central. Script-based, home user considerations, what you want to do if you just want to script out an agent install, what do you want to do if you want to use full on PowerShell to use our API. So I'm going to hopefully show that by the end today. Well, that's wonderful. It kicks me out while I'm talking. But when it comes to VMware, it is also good to get a good understanding of the hardware. Okay, so again, iDrac settings, network, click on services, and you will see SNMP agent. You're going to come down to here, and again, public. Now, the difference of setting up SNMP, well, that's funny. I must have saved it earlier. But SNMP 1, 2, and then if you want SNMP v3, you also need to set up the authentication user, which will also incorporate the encryption as well. And that's how you do it. It's not overly difficult. The important part here, as long as the Dell management software is installed, OMSA, I believe it's called, as long as that's installed, what we're going to be able to do is now query the iDrac and also the information behind it, so that we're going to be able to get all of the hardware information. Now, let me just show you what it looks like in my vCenter. Now, this is an iDrac 7. And you're going to notice all of these. And that is because when you're looking at physical drive and you start doing VMware as in LUNs, what happens is you are going to consume anywhere from probably 97 to 100% of the physical disks, right? So you may want to threshold and turn off use space percentage, because they are full, at least according to the drive, they're full, right? What you're mostly concerned about is the state of the drive. Is it going to fail? Like, that is the important part here. So in Hyper-V, very, very different. You know, you're not going to have fully consumed disks, right? So there's something to consider, but you're going to see all the DIMM slots, you know, CPU sockets, chassis detection, BIOS, temperature, system board, CMOS, maybe not on this particular one, but it really depends on the per controller. But yes, you know, temperature, obviously being able to see some of that. I don't know why it's not giving me any temperature. It usually does, but it's one of those things where the iDrac monitoring is really beneficial, and it's something that you can also do in a company of VMware. Now, that is just iDrac. I personally like iDrac monitoring outside of VMware hardware monitoring. There's reasons why. When I did VMware monitoring, I didn't want any hardware stuff in my VMware monitoring. I wanted to separate it into a whole other license, right? Now, if you don't want to pay for a license for separate monitoring, you don't have to. Good news is you can do much of this through VMware as well. And we're going to now take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back and talk about VMware in just a little bit. Hey guys, we're back. Okay, so prepare the customer environment, VMware hosts. Now, I had a really great question from Zachary, only because this is something I experience all the time. And I work with probably anywhere from 2 to 6 partners a week, depending on how busy I am and how available I can meet with partners. And again, you know, I'm VMware certified. I love VMware. I love what they do. And I'm always kind of like, I got my VTSP, VSP, and my VCP way back in the day. I don't know what version, maybe, you know, VMware version 5. It's probably all out of date at this point, but you know, it's one of those things where I'll hop into a partner server and, you know, they'll tell me like, I don't have any SNMP monitoring, right? Let me circle back to the beginning. What can you do if you're a partner and you're now discovering there's things you can do as part of your onboarding process? Again, take those bite-sized chunks, right? Go in, find your best customer, the one you've got the greatest relationship with, and start there. And that's what I always did. Like, I always had good working relationships with some of the law firms I used to look after, only because if you ever looked after a law firm, they can be kind of needy. So it was one of those things. I did a little bit of a VCO service / and central admin, and I'd go in and meet with the customer and tell them what we were going to do, and, you know, kind of align things. But Zach's question here is this. I have a question. When looking at our probes, most of them have not been set up for SNMP. I'm assuming this is because mostly of our monitoring is done primarily through Windows agents. Is or are there benefits to using probe-based monitoring as opposed to agent-based monitoring? Absolutely. You know, agents are great for the Windows-based monitoring, custom services, running things against the operating system. That's great. The probe, in my opinion, is a bit of the unsung hero in vCenter. It can do some very, very important and quality things to really differentiate your business from the competitor down the block. And that has to do with the hardware stuff. And I'll give you a prime example. I looked after that massive nonprofit, right? They had like, I don't know how many servers. It was close to, I think I told you this story earlier. It might have been in the morning, but I looked after this massive nonprofit, and the MSP previous to me must have had, I don't know, anywhere from 60 to 80 VMs. They were throwing in cheap SSD drives. Like it was an absolute mess. So I go in, I put in my hardware monitoring, and it's working, but I've got red alerts everywhere, right? Like it is insane, because they're using these, cheap, what are they? The green brand. I forget what they are, but you know what I mean. But it's one of those things where, instead of the red or the quality versions, but it's one of those things where that was the differentiator, and it's now an opportunity, because then I worked with our owner and said, hey, this is a mess. We need to fix this. So you're actually generating more professional services for your business because of what is going on with your monitoring, right? And I always circle back to the sales side because I used to work in sales. And it was one of those things where if you have quality monitoring, it can be a net opportunity for your business as well. So yes, pro-based monitoring is super important. But when I start talking about VMware, the probe is already querying VMware for things like what's going on with the VMware operating system, those VMs, some of the other data stores, but also can do hardware, right? So I separated my hardware monitoring to iDrac and iLOS. We were a big HP partner, but I used to work for Dell, so I used to work for HP and Dell once upon a time. But it's one of those things where I like breaking out it separately into its own encompassed hardware group, which is really the iDrac or iLO. Both are very good, but I wouldn't have to do this step. Now, the important part here is if you want both VMware and hardware monitoring and you want quality, you do have to install a VIB. It's no longer called a VIB. I still call them VIB files, but essentially it's called the offline bundle, right? And if you go to Dell, if you go to HP, Lenovo, whoever, there's accompanying software that you can install into VMware via CLI to get more out of it. It's almost like an enhancement pack for the SIM services or for the APIs. And this is what you want to do on Dell, right? You're going to log into the system, VMware's vSphere client or vCenter server. You're going to bring it into maintenance mode. You're going to unzip the offline bundle and extract the VIB and the metadata.zip. Use the VIB to install server administrator software, which is the actual VIB file, on the desired ESX host, okay? And these are your commands, right? Again, this is where you take a screenshot, okay? And again, this is my manual as well, by the way, so you don't necessarily have to take a screenshot because I have accompanied a lot of this information already in the manual. And now I'm going ahead and basically telling you that, between when VMware was a part of Dell, they've now changed the naming conventions. VIB was a vSphere installation bundle. Okay, now they've changed the name to Dell Open Manage, essentially, for Dell, right? And I think it's probably changed for HP as well. Okay, but again, it is now an enhancement into the SIM services. So now we can get more out of it. Now, that being said, it is not 100%. Those APIs change and break from version to version. And Central is only as good as the kind of the SIMs that we can call. But you'll get more out of it if you do install the offline bundle. Okay. Now, I'm not going to demo based on time because there's some other important things I want to show you. But again, follow the instructions in the manual and it's all right there for you. Now, what we're going to do is prepare the customer environment for other devices. Now, this is something that I see time and time again, okay? Especially with those partners that are running over 5,000 devices. Now, other devices doesn't always indicate something bad, but when I see a lot of them, in fact, I was working with a partner out of the UK and they had over 1,000 other devices. Now, it usually at that point indicates something wrong with their onboarding process, right? And then once we start talking about the discovery, the pro-based discovery, I'm going to kind of explain to you why you'll see other. Now, again, when you come into N-central under asset discovery, you'll see things like desktop calling, desktop DCP, whatever. You're going to see things like Windows Server or Windows Server Management Interface. This is the iDrac. And then they're just sitting there in limbo. And what should happen is if you have devices in N-central, right? Now, we're going to charge you for them. For every pro license, there's a fee. But to you, the MSP, this is revenue, right? Say we're charging you $2 USD a device. Might be a little high, I don't know. I don't work in sales anymore. So it's one of those things where it's when you come in here, you want to be importing them based on the fact that your customer is paying you to manage their infrastructure, right? That's the end of it, right? How you price that is entirely up to you, okay? So other devices can also mean there are problems with the N-central onboarding. Again, what I see with a lot of our elite and super elite partners, the people who have 5,000 plus devices in N-central, is that they'll have a whack of these others. But what these others actually mean is firewall and switching. That's a lot of switches, by the way. But these were switches. And then I come in and I'm like, okay, so tell me about your onboarding process. Tell me about what your steps are. You know, do you have your SOP? Can I see your SOP? And oftentimes what they're doing, especially with some of the national providers, I won't pick on anybody, but there's a couple on the phone. But it's one of those things where I'm just kidding around. But it's one of those things where, you know, all it takes is for one tech on the West Coast not to know how to onboard in Central, and you'll get into this. And then when it happens again and again, over a year period or a 2-year period, these mistakes just start compounding, right? So that is why, as you know, for example, I'll pick on Tony, my friend Tony here. You know, he'll come in and spot this and do a review every quarter and say, okay, we've got a problem with the monitoring, what's going on, right? So you should always be questioning what this is. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with onboarding a customer and having one particular device as other. But when you see a lot of it, that is usually indicative of a larger issue, okay? Now, we're gonna talk about what to do. So N-central has device classes already mapped. The problem is that we don't have a wireless access point device class. We don't have a UPS device class. We don't have a NAS device class. So these are things that you can do to, you know, classify your devices. Now, let me just come in here really, really quickly and find my server. Hopefully I'm still on VPN. And we're just going to launch into the N-central admin console right here. And then you can see that there are going to be some defaults, right, along here. Now I've added in a couple, right? UPS, WAP. I can also do something like NAS. Now, is NAS really a device class? No, NAS is probably in the same category as a SAN. The thing is, in N-central, we treat it differently. It is a storage device, but none of the MIBs are going to work the same way, right? So what I typically do is when I create my custom device class, I just choose everything. Oops. Let's go up here, select all, and then click OK. That means we'll use any technology we want to be able to query the device. Obviously, in this case, it's going to be SNMP. So now that that's created, I can come back to my N-central. And for example, if I had a NAS in here, I'll just reset filter. I don't. But for example, if I'll just pick on this brother laser here, if I want to reclassify this device as a NAS, I now can, right? Now it's a printer, so I'm not going to, but you definitely could. Now, if I had a service template for a QNAP, for example, so let's go to Google for a sec, or I should say DuckDuckGo. So if I go to the enable GitHub, and this is a partner run GitHub, by the way, this isn't something officially from Enable. We have a few partners that administrate it for us. I shouldn't say for us, they do it themselves. But this is where if you wanted to come in and find some QNAP monitoring, you could do that. You can take that QNAP somewhere in here. Well, maybe it's not on this one. It's probably listed under custom monitoring. That's why. There we go. QNAP hard drive status, QNAP volume status. It's all right here. Anyways, you might want to bookmark that because we're going to come back to this in a moment. But this is where you can come in and add in your custom device class and also include rules, service templates, and notifications, right? So you can do things out of the box to really differentiate between you and the other guy. Okay. Okay, we demoed. Now, my favorite point. Okay, we've got 30 minutes left, and I'm probably going to spend about 10 minutes on rules, filters, notifications, and service templates because, like creating the device class, if you know what to do, right, you can include the filter like NAS or QNAP. You can include things like notifications and monitoring. So let's look at it, right? But it's more than that. You can even encompass your onboarding into this. It depends on how deep you want to go, okay? For example, you're onboarding a new customer. Well, do you know you can create rules to automatically onboard them with EDR, with managed AV, with AV Defender, patch management, backup. You can include scheduled tasks and automation. You can deploy software. It's all about your automation in that regard, right? You know, is software installed? Well, we'll say is Adobe. Let's just pick on Adobe. Is Adobe installed? If it is, okay, we're good. If it's not, download from X repository, install, we're done. You're now standardizing and making sure that your customers have the right onboarding routines. And again, when it comes to pricing out an onboarding, there is usually a fee, right? It's a professional service. It's time and materials. You're going ahead and paying people to, you know, look after the IT department. And that doesn't come for free. So that usually is a fee-based service right out of the gates. You know, give me $1,500, I'll set you all up, and then here's your monthly fixed fee for $2,000 a month or whatever it might be, right? But there are onboarding rules that you can set up and targeting specific sets of devices using custom properties. And that's really important, right? Again, things like, you know, I always use BitLocker as my example, but every time you onboard a customer, automatically you're running scripts, pulling the BitLocker keys and putting them in Central for yourself. Monitoring and notifications and custom monitoring, right? Powerware, right? So yes, you know, there's no UPS device class in Central, but if I create one, I can create a Powerware template, I can create a APC, it doesn't matter. You can just call it UPS because the same monitoring applies to both devices. Software deployment and other onboarding tasks. Now, we always had our stack of technologies when I worked for an MSP. So, you know, things like Cisco Umbrella, a Desk Director, right? The enable tray icon. There was a number of other applications that we would ensure that would go into every single customer. So you can do that as part of your onboarding using, you know, rules, right? So let's kind of take a look at that. And we'll come into, let's just collapse this and this, configuration, monitoring, service template. Sorry, we're just talking about rules. And we'll come in and set up onboarding rules. Now, I would probably set up 2 to 3, right? But I'm going to kind of stick everything into one, right? Onboarding new customer. Okay. From here, say I'm going to choose Windows laptops and workstations. Okay. Now, This could be servers included. I don't want to muddy the waters too much, so I'm just going to use this as my example for workstations and laptops. Now, when I'm onboarding tray research, for example, there might be specific maintenance windows I want for patch management. Maybe because they haven't had an MSP, they had an IT guy in their office once a week, but he hasn't come in 6 months. So patching is way out of date. So what I can do is, set up these maintenance windows to be very, very quick and turnkey, so I can patch the environment really, really quick. So I can do that. Monitoring options, right? So, if I'm pushing new software or what have you, or if I'm doing, particular monitoring, I can do that out of the gates. Scheduled task profiles, setting up desktop maintenance, server maintenance right out of the gates, right? Custom scans, but turning things on, right? Let's turn on AV Defender, right? I'll install it. I'll choose to install the disk encryption, which is really just BitLocker. If TPM is available, prompt for PIN, I'll leave that blank. Run pre-scan install, I do always do that. And then choose your profiles, right? And then standard removal. They'll probably have an AV, so AV Defender then can remove it. Backup as well. Maybe I'll standardize on backup. Okay, I agree. And then choose your profile. Again, you're standardizing. Then I'll let this soak for a week. I'll come back and I'll just turn all of it off. All the products are installed. You actually have to tell N-central to remove things, by the way. So even if you remove Tray Research out of here and you've got a whole bunch of things, well, now you can actually move them into your standard offering, fully managed patch management, right? So here's Tray, and set that up, click Save. Now I can move them into my typical set of rules for patching and AV and backup and everything else. You have an onboarding rule set, and now you have also your standard professional services your standard managed services offering that you can move them to after you get them up to speed, right? I could spend an entire 2 hours just talking about onboarding rules in N-central. That's how important they can be. The hardest thing is that you're going to have to remind yourself to come in and migrate them from an onboarding rule to a like right now, this patch now, right? That's basically a patch management onboarding. I have no idea what their patch levels are right now. All I know is everything's out of date. I'm doing everything immediate, checking every hour, setting up automatic reboots. Oh, is this on servers? No, it's on workstations. So it's one of those things where I'm just trying to get the environment up to speed as quickly as possible to protect them. I've got buy-in from their management team, right? So something like Patch It Now, that's just an onboard. Once I stabilize them and get them up to speed and they've got the right Windows build, hey, I'm good to go. Any questions so far? I know you guys are kind of quiet since the break, but if you do have questions, feel free to ask them, okay? Now, the other thing I want to talk about is service templates. And I'm just going to pick on this APC UPS. I already know that all of these monitors work for PowerWare. So say you're a PowerWare dealer, right? I can create PowerWare monitoring. I'm doing it manually. Go to my UPS. From here, I can call it, I'll just choose APC PDU. I'll add that service. Save. I'll add one more. You get the picture here. Okay. And then I have no device associations. But now that I have this PowerWare monitoring, I'm going to put delete just so I know to come in and delete it at some point. What I can do is now come back to my rules and incorporate it into my PowerWare onboard, right? So now I've got all the APC monitoring ready to go for PowerWare. They use the same RFC standard across many vendors actually in the UPS space. I wish network devices were a lot like that. Unfortunately, they're not. So that's it, right? And then once you have it all configured, you get to drop it into your, again, your managed services, again, workstations and laptops. But again, this is where you come in and set up your maintenance windows or what have you. It's all right here. So there's a lot of power between notifications, service templates, and rules. Okay, now say we've set up the customer environment. That's what the last hour and a half has really been about. I set up the customer and then I prep the customer environment. That's what I've been going through, just prep, setting up VMware, setting up the Hyper-V servers, right? Setting up the iDracs or ILOs. You prep your customer environment before you do anything. Now that that's done, now that we've done the prep, there are discovery best practices. Now, usually I go through a lot of slides around theory and everything else. I'd like to do a show and tell on this particular one, right? So let's come into actions, run a discovery. Now, I'm never going to run a discovery at the SO level. So I'm going to come down to Trey. This is the new company I'm going to be onboarding here. So I'm going to run a discovery. And then what I'm going to do is pick my probe. I've got 4, so I'll just pick Ivy here. We'll pick on her. And then 192.168.0.12254. And I'm sure you've used N-Central and done a discovery. That's fine. You have larger customer environments, and Jesse brought up the fact that he's kind of apprehensive about using SNMP because it took down a switch at one point. I won't get into what that actually is, but very, very rare. SNMP, in fact, the probe could take something down, SNMP not, right? You can just start spamming the switch if you don't know what you're doing. Now, it's one of those things where you can come in and choose that particular subnet, right? The way you want. Now, I don't. I like using these. In fact, I'll do multiple discoveries if there's multiple subnets or multiple VLANs. Let's talk about the auto import. What are you contractually obligated to look after in that customer? I have, when I worked for an MSP, we had customers that were like, I just want you to look after the network and server. We've got a guy who we can call for support. How much are you going to charge me? Well, yeah, but we like to look after everything because even though you've got a guy, that's just our business. Okay, you're looking after everything. Okay, perfect. Keep an eye on this. Never, everybody just throws everything over, right? So take out other because you do not want to import this one ever, right? If something gets classified as other, you can manually pull it in if you so choose, but we never want to automatically import other. Okay? This is what I typically do, right? If you're if you're onboarding a good customer who is fixed fee, fully managed, you're basically going to come in, choose, say laptop, NAS, printer. Let's say they have VMware, a Linux server. Scroll down here. It's an iDrac. You got Windows servers. They've got a SAN, switch and router, some access points, a battery, and then something like Windows. Well, let's go Mac as well. They've got a couple Macs. So something like that. That's what I want my auto import to be. And then again, I'm going to install agents into this. Oh, and forgot servers. Finish. Nope, we're not done yet. Okay, again, they have VMware. So let's turn that on, right? Default, web service ports and or SIM ports. We're going to add in root account. And then what we can do is click OK. Don't save that. SNMP. You're going to have your own SNMP standard for your MSP. Just call it SNMP. And then what you're going to do is MSP Unity string, something like that. Now, I always put the time at 1500. That's just me. Okay. Schedule. You will see that the default is set to now. You want to change that to reoccurring, especially on VMware, because this will die. If you eventually, the probe will just lose communication, and what you've done is told it, don't requery it in a 24-hour time period. So let's go, what time is it? 2:42. So let's go 1500. Oh, 1500, right? So every day at 1500, I'm going to look for VMware. I'm going to requery it the right way every day. Done. SNMP at least once a day. Done. Okay, we'll call this tray onboarding discovery. Done. Finish. And that is how you do a discovery. You might be going, well, I do all my discoveries via the probe. Oh, no, 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 no. No. You do not. One of your steps might be to install the probe into the server. That's fine. But you want to skip the step where it asks to do a discovery. Discovering is done from Incentral right here. Absolutely. There's more configuration. You don't find Mac and Linux or anything when it comes to the probe in that probe standard. This is where you do all of your setup, right? So yes, get your field services team to prep the environment, or your professional services to prep the environment for managed services, but it is you who should be coming in here, running a discovery, setting all of this up, and then eventually you're going to have discovered assets. Now, if you've done it right, you shouldn't see a Windows server called Harley. Now, I know I've done that discovery. I'll just import it because I actually do want it in there. But it's one of those things where this is where you'll fact find, right? What's going on? Like, why isn't that workstation, just sitting there, right? And again, based on the conversation we had earlier about other devices, that is where you can, spend your time and maybe troubleshoot or what have you. Okay, so we talked about automated probe deployment and reoccurring discoveries. Again, recurring. Always look to do recurring discoveries, especially if you have any SNMP enabled devices or VMware. Those two should always be recurring. You can even split it out. If you want to do a one-time and it's just Windows servers and Windows workstations, one thing, once you get the agent out there, it doesn't need to be recurring. Already installed, is ready to go and check in. It's for all the stuff that you add in that doesn't have, that needs SNMP or API calls or what have you. Okay. Now let's talk about scripts, right? So we're coming to the very last 15 minutes. I always like to spend a little time on, what happens if you have a really large customer and, a lot of home users or something to that effect. Home users always pose a challenge, especially if home users don't have install rights on a laptop, because then they need someone with elevated permissions to be able to do that, right? So you as the administrator can log in remotely and do it yourselves. I've done that. I've had people do that, I mean. But also, when you have another MSP who is using Enable, you may want to script out an agent deployment. Okay, so let me just pull up Firefox here and go to here. Because under scripts and automation policies, you're going to find one called this, deploy the Incentral agent. Now, in that particular script, okay, there are 3 important lines that you need to complete. PowerPoint. There you go. Okay, so when you download that particular deploy the Incentral agent, I don't know why it's not formatted correctly for me on either, but this variable server host, variable JSON web token, and the variable specified customer IDs. So I want to show you how to deal with these three things. Because people ask me all the time, well, where do you get the JSON Web Token? Or what is the JSON Web Token? Is it the same as the reg token? No, in fact, it's very different. So a reg token for the Incentral agent, okay, so I come to probe and agent, every customer specific agent and probe has what is called a registration token, okay? Here, that's what it looks like. You can copy it, you can incorporate it into your script for agent deployment. Also, if you're looking to use our API in Incentral, you will have to create what is called an API user. Create user, call it API, JMM API at in-able, and let's go with of course, I don't know what complexity that Mark said on this, but it's crazy. Maybe it's special character. Nope. Doesn't matter. Anyways, API access, check this box. What you can do is then save. Let me go back up to the enable level because I already have it pre-configured. API. Okay. API access, API only user, generate your JSON Web Token, and now you can incorporate that into the script. One thing to note is that you have to have MFA not required turned on. You cannot do two-factor authentication on an API. Okay. Chris has a question. If you have a large customer with many sites, do you set up the recurring discovery on the customer level or on the site level? I prefer to do the site level. I think it's entirely up to you. I mean, if you're talking about a really large customer, like say they've got office buildings nationwide, and you know, for example, various cities, and there's maybe 200 site, you know, 200. Like say you've got 1,000 users or something like that. And there's 200 devices per region. Definitely, I would do the site level way that you're describing. But for the most part, because I like the management piece, always at the SO level, I like to personally do everything at the SO level because I'll know I can find it later on. I will never remember that I've got one customer where I buried it under the site or customer level. So that's where, I mean, I might reverse engineer it or go, okay, I know it's missing. So I know I've got discoveries somewhere. I might figure it out. I just find it takes longer. I like all of my management where I can at the SO level, including automations and scripting. Okay, so that's it. All right, so let's come in here, come back to the script. The server host is the URL of your server. The JSON Web Token, I show you how to get. The specified customer ID, well, I'm sure you know where your access codes are, but if you don't, come into administration, customers, and this is your customer ID right here. I wish we'd call it customer ID, but we still call them access codes for whatever reason, right? So here they are. And then what you can do is take this particular script, format it, run it, and install via PowerShell. I use this quite a bit with partners who have other RMMs. They want to displace, they want to consolidate. For example, they go through an M&A activity. We have automate, but now we're moving to Incentral. Here's a script. You can push it out via your RMM, and off you go. Cool. Let's close that. No. Now, at the end of my bootcamp, I do want to indicate that there are other things that you're going to want to do, especially if your customer has cloud services, right? Office 365, maybe an Azure tenant, and obviously looking, or even cloud applications, right? You can incorporate that into your managed services offering, making sure that you have a visualized representation of what uptime actually is to see if there's any outages, right? You'll get some red in here if there is. There is topology mapper as well, right? And this is always good to incorporate into something like your QBR or your VCO conversations. Like, here's your topology as of last quarter or this past year or what have you, right? Okay. Helen, can you show where to create the customized device class one more time? Sure. I know I kind of glazed over that because on my server, I have to go through a whole backend thing. So behind in Central is something called port 10,000. It's the admin console. So let me show you here. Now, if I had the password, I'd just put it in here. But if you go to your URL, port 10,000, you should see this. If you can't, it means it's been blocked on your network. You might be working from home or something like that. It might be on your internal LAN only. And that's part of my best practices, that you do not expose this to the internet. Now, I'm not technically on our internet. I'm on a virtual private network right now, so I'm able to see it. But if I was to hop off my VPN, I wouldn't be able to hit port 10,000 either. So, and then from there, let me just pull it up. Here we go. You come into port 10,000, you sign in. You'll see something over here to the right called device class. And this is where you click add, select all, give it a name, and call it whatever, NAS, EPS, whatever. Now, I will warn you, there is one thing you cannot do in custom device classes in N-Central. Do not try to separate a Hyper-V server from a Windows server. It's a Windows server. You cannot meddle with how we classify devices on Windows or Mac, for that matter. You can do some things on network devices or other appliances, a wireless access point, but you cannot change this or split this. I have seen partners split out things like firewall, switch. Those things you can do. It's more manual in my opinion, but whatever, you're going to spend the time, do it, classify it whichever way you want. But I've had partners try to split Windows workstation and laptop into workstation. So you don't want to do it. You're going to give yourself nothing but headaches. Okay. Chris gave me 5. Thanks, buddy. Helen, any suggestions on how to do Lenovo server hardware monitoring? Buy a Dell or buy an HP? No, Helen, I'm just joking. I only recently found out that Lenovo is exposing the MIB to their servers. That's something personally I want to take on at some point. I'm a little too busy right now. I'm already getting into the planning stages of what I'm working on for next year. So what I can tell you, there is no Lenovo hardware monitoring as I know it today. I haven't even had a chance to play around with it, walk a Lenovo server, see what MIBs are exposed, what I can actually map and do on my own. I will get around to it at some point. I'm just not there yet. Any other questions, guys? Oh, Zachary, cool. Okay. Do NetPath and that topology mapper come with enabled by default? And if not, how do we integrate this? Dude, perfect question. Now, I absolutely love NetPath. I think it's probably one of the most underutilized capabilities in N-Central. Now, I know I'm kind of sounding like a sales guy right now, but where did my, here, I'll just go back. Let's talk about NetPath first, because I love NetPath. In fact, we actually took this technology straight from Orion. If you're not familiar with Orion, Orion is a super expensive network monitoring tool. It does monitoring, has no management really, other than the fact that you can actually back up configs and some other stuff. But the important part here is we took that technology and stuck it into N-Central, and I love it for monitoring cloud services. Now, I wrote a blog recently about end user experiencing. Well, I've never even seen that air before. Crazy. Let me just try that one more time, Zachary. Launched it this morning without issue, so I have no idea what just happened. Did I break my VPN? No, still gone. It's too bad because let me just back this out entirely. Crazy. Okay, well, I can't show it to you. It's too bad because I have office.com set up in there right now, and you can see the entire cloud. It's amazing. The good news is there's so much redundancy behind where once that packet actually hits Microsoft, there's so much redundancy in there that, you know, it's always, I shouldn't say always, typically going to work. It is Microsoft, it goes down once in a while. What's really interesting is that all of the different hops that packet has to take to get to Microsoft, right? And then once it does, it goes through so many different channels just to get to wherever it's supposed to go. I love looking at NetPath. I think it's really interesting, but also I think there's a lot of value to it as well in terms of just understanding latency and uptime, right? And I think that's really important when you have cloud services for your customers, because you might have construction companies, you might have lawyer firms. Think of your biggest and best customers, right? Right. That's where you want to understand what technologies they have and what are they using in the cloud, and that's where NetPath comes in. Do you need to go to a specific customer? I don't know. I don't know who I did this under. Let me try NetPath one more time. I know I did it under. Try. Let's try it. You shouldn't have to. You should be able to look at NetPath in any view. But if this works, I'll give you a 5. Anyways, hopefully it's going to load here. But yes, that is NetPath. But also there is topology mapper as well. Now I only set this up this morning, so I don't know what's even in here. No, sorry. I wish I could show it, but it's pretty cool. I do recommend that you try to test it out. If you don't have NetPath in your Central, it is a licensed feature. It is super cheap. You can get like 25 paths for $25 a month or something like that. It's not much. But when you start, if you're a major account, for example, and you've got 300 customers, you might have to spend $500 a month, right? It depends on how much value you think it's going to get, but I do recommend testing it and determining it yourself. Do you monitor your cloud service for each customer, again, to differentiate problem for only a subset of your customers, or do you monitor it only once? When I onboard, I make everything customer specific. Just because they're using Office 365 doesn't mean, their tenant is the same as some other tenant. Like you can do uptime easily enough right through in central monitoring, right? But I try to get very specific as I can for that one customer, especially the ones that are paying me 10 grand a month or more, right? I will actually take days to onboard that customer. I spend time and I will build out monitoring specific to their applications. I'll give you an example. I have an auto dealership that is nationwide, right? They're right across Canada. And they're part of this major consortium of dealerships all across Canada, and there's hundreds of them. And I was looking after their network, and there was hundreds of these networks. And it was a massive effort that took 2 months to onboard. But I think I did such a good job on understanding what was valuable to their team in terms of, just monitoring uptime, their applications, their storage, their accessibility to, cloud services and everything else, that they were super, super happy with what we were doing. And that's why I think there's a lot of value in onboarding your customer correctly and spending a lot of time on onboarding, because in my opinion, the slower you go in onboarding, right, the more methodical, I should say, you are in your onboarding, the dividends it pays for your team longer term. And that's a whole reason why I did this, is because I just see so many little mistakes in onboarding. And if you're a really good MSP, you're going to customize your onboarding offerings, make it seamless and fast, as fast as you can, where you've got rules and templates and everything just automated. Right? And that's really going to be my phase 2 next year around this particular boot camp. I didn't get a chance to talk about automation on it, but I'm going to incorporate a master policy, for example, Chris, and some other stuff. Okay, well, I appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you so much. Have yourself a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.